Hi, this is Janet Fitch, and it is noon on Wednesday, which means it is Writing Wednesday, where I answer your writing questions and hopefully solve some problems or mysteries or address an issue that you have been banging your head against for a while, like a low-lying branch. um, it is fall, so the weather is changing rapidly, and I am, as you know, a huge advocate of using the senses in writing your fiction, always keeping your character in a place, in a time, in a certain light, in a certain season. And these rapidly changing seasons are really, spring and fall, are really a good time to go out and sample the, hi Innocent, hey Linda. It's a really good time to go out um, into the street or into your yard or a park or anything and notice what's the temperature. What's the quality of the air? Is it dry? Is it moist? Is it moving? Is it still? What, look around, see what's blooming, what's happening with plants and, the plants around you, what's happening with the animals. What is the color of the sky? We've talked a lot about color and how um, to avoid cliches, there's no robin's egg blue, there's no, none of that. Anything you've heard before is a cliche. So really look at that sky and ask yourself, what color is it? And try to come up with an interesting blue. And, how is the light striking the buildings? What kinds of shapes are emerging? If you were a painter, what would you paint in what you're seeing that's specific to the time and the slant of light and the quality of the air? What sounds, what smells, it's trash day as usual, noon on Wednesday in my neighborhood. So, in the symphony of the city, these are the great symbols with CY symbols. Is the trash trucks and them banging the cans around. Right now it's been very dry, but our persimmons are almost fully ripe. Squirrels are in that tree, and they're just obnoxious. They'll take a bite out of one and then throw it on the neighbor's car. So there's inter-neighbor begins, the human landscape as well, the inter-neighbor conflicts or questions. What are the sounds of autumn? What are the smells of autumn in your real environment, not what you see on TV or in the movies or in a book or something, not acquired knowledge, but direct observation. When I was a kid, growing up in LA, fall, late September, early October were our hottest months, and yet we were besieged by advertising for plaid skirts and knee socks and sweaters, and all of the pictures that the teachers would put up would be falling leaves and that kind of thing. And it had nothing to do with the real reality that we were walking to school and coming home with, of what actually does fall look like where you are. Could be 105 and kids are hanging around the thermometer at school wondering if they're ever going to let us go. So, the specifics of fall in LA, we have pomegranates. We didn't get much pomegranates on our trees this year, but we had a lot of flowers. So what does that mean? The persimmons, a lot of them up near the top have black streaks in them because it was such a hot summer. They got sunburned. what's blooming, what a tree that was brutally pruned, um, big pine, brutally pruned and shortened and stuff, is full of furry um, bunches of needles now. You absolutely cannot see the trunk or the cut off branches because it is grown back with a fury. And I love to see that tree. The reservoir in the neighborhood is very, very low, and you can see the white bathtub line around it where the water should be and isn't. Hi, Wendy. Hi, Dedria. Hi, Brenda. Hey, Peggy. Um, it's so what is fall? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you smelling? What are you cooking? I made my first soup last night. Still hot, but the clock in the blood, says autumn. So keep that in your weather. I keep a weather journal because it's very important to be able to go back when you're writing fiction, to be able to go back and remind yourself, what is the 5th of October like in LA? When you're in February, it's hard to remember, but you want to pin it. So your fiction becomes very specific. You always want to be specific and use observation rather than guessing, rather than basing it on what you're seeing in, hi Lily, hi Zunaid, rather than what you're seeing, in the movies, or, secondhand, third hand, fourth hand regurgitations of perception. You want to have the original perception and the language that it muscles you up to describe something that has been described a million times. When I was a kid, we had carob trees in the neighborhood, and we still do. Carob trees, and this time of year they drop their pods. Squirrels will half eat them and then throw them at people, throw them down. The big pines, you look all the way up to the top and you can see the giant cones just waiting to come down and dent somebody's car or kill them. Is it damp in the morning? Is it dry in the morning? What does the sheen of dew in the park look like on a mown lawn? It has kind of a hazy, furry frost on it. I won't remember that in 3 months. So it's important to collect your information. I keep a small book like this on me, write it down, and then I will take the contents of this and put it into my computer in sight, smells, etc., or weather, print it out, put it in the 3-ring binder. Hi, Jill. Jill says, my heart is bursting like a pomegranate, Garcia Lorca said. And Ruthie is talking about such a treat to eat those pomegranates. Difficult when you're wearing your white Peter Pan shirts. Yeah, I remember when I was a kid. See, it's a nostalgic time of year, but any kind of sense impression often has a memory component with it. So pomegranates, I can still remember sitting on the back porch of a friend's house in our flip-flops and shorts, because it's hot weather in LA in the fall, and spitting those pomegranate seeds on the steps and staining everything in their on their back steps. It's quite a vivid, stirring memory. So here's a question Wendy has. Any tips on how to make the setting like a character in a story? Changes in the setting affect the story, maybe. The setting is generally, it's part of the story in the way that all of the characters in your story are a product of the land that they came from. They are visible elements of that the landscape. In my books, say in my LA books, those characters are LA stories. Those people were created here, and they represent the place just as much as the place is. It's not an empty stage. It's part of who they are, who they became. My Russian novel, I mean, she's a St. Petersburg character. She has attitudes that were specific to St. Petersburg. She came up in that cold, that elegance, kind of frozen elegance of that city, the dampness, the canals, the sense of secrets, the former empire. So people are part of their landscape. My current character from Los Angeles, but living for many years in Northern California, and especially in the Gold Rush country, definitely affects who she is. Even though she's back in Los Angeles, she has a complex relationship with the city, and she brings that scent of the foothills of the Sierra and the pines of the Sierra and the stony soil. So characters represent their places, and you can't. So all good fiction, who said that? All good fiction is fiction of place. I think Dostoevsky said that. And you can't separate Dostoevsky's characters from his landscape. You can't separate Faulkner's characters from the landscape that produced them. Character is landscape. Landscape is character. So setting is not just a character. Setting, don't think of it as setting. Think of it as terroir, like wine. Those grapes grew in that soil with that exposure and that kind of climatic influence. Think of your setting, your locale, as the place that grew these people. So they are, it was like, I guess it was in White Oleander that Astrid thought about her mother growing up in the poisoned soil of Los Angeles. Like, what is an oleander? Is it just natively poison, or is it pulling poison out of the soil? I mean, it's a metaphor, of course. That is not scientific, but it's a concept that bears thinking about. Durrell writes a lot about this especially in Justine, the first volume of the Alexandria Quartet, that these are people who exhibit the traits of their city in various ways, that they are inseparable from the city that raised them. And I think it's really interesting for Americans because we are so mobile that we don't often think about the soil that raised us and the place that we are living. I know people are beginning to think about the history of the land and who was on the land before they were, but they don't think about how the land they grew up in, how they exhibit the terroir that raised them, because they're not living there anymore. Maybe they're living in New York, but they're really from Missouri. New York could be a way to highlight the Missouriness of them. It's interesting in such a mobile way of life that the Americans have. It's something that you see in Susan Straight's new book Mecca, which is about the Orange County of the that you don't think of, not the beaches and the big giant shopping malls and the glitterati, but that there still are ranchos back in the hills, and the vaqueros who work the ranchos, and this whole hidden history. And then there's a CHP cop who's basically a vaquero in, in contemporary terms, motorcycle cop. That's a horseman. And his relationship to his father, grandfather, the men he grew up with, his mother, these hidden homelands, really. She talks about Riverside, she talks about San Bernardino, she talks about the desert, not as a place to go and party, but retire in a gated community. But the people who have been there, they've been there for a long time, the way they interact and the way the place owns them. So she's not as interested in American mobility, that old story, the motivated individual who breaks from his home, from his hometown or homeland or whatever, and then seeks their fortune, and then we find them in New York doing some sort of something, and making it on their own, and the loneliness and the estrangement and stuff. But she's very interested in people who stay attached to the home soil, and the concentric rings of relationship, and how these people exhibit, they are part of the land. And we, as Americans, we should think more about that. You see it in literature, but maybe you need that lens to try to see how your characters represent the place that made them, or maybe layered them. Maybe they're from, they're both New Yorkers and they're from wherever they're from. And sometimes in American literature, it's denying the original self. I'm my New York sophisticate, or I'm my LA star, or whatever. But that past self is still there, and, flavoring the wine. Let's see what we have here. So Dedria, Weather Journal, great idea for contemporary work and historical work using the U.S. Weather Bureau reports. Yeah, you could do a weather notebook for your character. Weather hasn't changed that much. Although there's more snow now, then. But you could have you can still use your own weather observations, but just maybe slide them back a little bit to allow for more winter than we have now, and more water. But you can, the smell of working off the smell of rain, or working off the heat of summer, you can use that in your historical stuff as well. Here's another question. Let's see. I've heard that praised in some novels in California, where, as you say, the land is a big part of the story. The land is always a big part of the story. People who write about, say, we're picking on New York. I shouldn't pick on New York. Say I'm reading something that's set in New Orleans, and the river is a big part of it, and the French culture is a part of it, and the fortune telling, and the Catholic Church, and the shape of the neighborhoods and the smells and stuff are part of the story. I would be disappointed if they weren't. Missouri. Every place is a place. Even suburbia is a place. The work of D.J. Waldy, who writes a lot about Lakewood, California, which was an early suburb, and the uniformity and stuff. But that is a place too, with a history, and with light and sounds and smells. That deserve to be explored on the page. Let's see what I've got. What else can I talk about? So Brenda is like looking for reliable information on DC. Well, I mean, sure, you've been there numerous times, I mean, really look at the different light. How is the light of March different than the light of August? What do you see? When is the interior of the Lincoln Memorial illuminated and when isn't? What about the shapes of the streets and the way that the angles of DC, that planned city, how does the light move on those diagonal streets, and what is illuminated and what isn't, and the quality of the air, the quality of the traffic, the quality of the, what's blooming. Very useful. She says, I live far from DC. Maybe I need a road trip. Well, you at least need to visit for a week or two, or even a few days, and just be your character looking at things, and make sure that the physical reality, that you're looking at physical reality. You're smelling the air, you're looking at the light, you're noticing what blooms. I was doing a lot of traveling this summer, and it was very interesting, like certain places you see a certain plant that blooms all the time. I was in, I think it was Napa. I noticed a lot of sequoias growing in Napa, and found out that there was some school in the 30s that gave every kid a sequoia, tiny sequoia sapling as part of, their California experience. And they planted them, and the whole city is full of sequoias. Or being in San Juan Capistrano, and there were hollyhocks everywhere. People had planted a bunch of hollyhocks. Certain cities have certain plants that they seem to be all over the place. Very useful. If reading is secondhand. It's, if you're going to read for research, read nonfiction. Don't steal from from fiction writers as much as you can, as far as, climate and stuff. But if you have to, at least do as much of original looking as you can, especially if it's in the States. For a short story, you're not going to fly to, Rome. But if you're writing a novel about Rome, set in Rome, you really owe it to yourself to go at least once or twice. So Malika, I am writing something that takes place in the Bronx at a bucolic section in a fancy prep school. But I have not been to the Bronx near there, although I lived in the Upper West Side. I just lost this. So I know the general area. How do I find out about the light, etc., without being able to visit? You can't visit? You sure? Google Earth is very good. But if you have lived in the Upper West Side, I don't know if you did this kind of observation. I mean, if you are working on a novel set in the Bronx, you owe it to yourself to go. The difficulty, of course, is that the Bronx as it is now is probably not the same Bronx as it was when you were, as your story. Maybe it is. But often we write about, the city of yesteryear. And then to go and see what it is currently can be very jarring, because it isn't the way it isn't the same city that you're describing. It has changed over time. But certain things will be the same in the light and so forth. And if you can get to New York, you owe it to yourself to get that. If you live in a foreign country and you can't get there, you have to figure out a way to immerse yourself. You have to watch movies and pause them, pause them, pause them, pause them, and describe to yourself what's, describe in language to yourself what you are seeing in a film that's actually shot there, not just, not just on a sound stage at Paramount. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What's the season? What's the light? You're going to look at Google Earth. Brenda says, she just checked out Google Earth for the first time. Yeah. Google Earth is extremely helpful for layout of the town. There was a book that I started that never came together that was set in Brownsville in New York. And not only did I go to Brownsville, that was pretty hairy. It didn't look much. It didn't. The neighborhood had changed tremendously since the 1920s. An 80-year, 90-year difference. But I could find landmarks that were the same. I could find buildings that were built at that time and were standing at that time. I could find the playground where the kids would hang out back in the 20s. It's still there. So it's worth doing your research as much as you can. If you can't go there, get as much as you can of the physical landscape, the light, the smells, what plants are growing, whatever you can get. Wendy says even small mining towns are different than they were 10 years ago. Yeah. Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, a lot of detail on moving around D.C. And it's making it real. Penny says, I touched this. There it is. Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, a lot of detail on moving around the city of D.C. One of the favorite memories is being there in January and seeing pansies planted near buildings like the Smithsonian. See the pansies. It's hard to make that up. Direct observation is so helpful. And they were covered with a thin veil of ice. See, that is something that will make it vivid for the reader. I've been at the MLK Junior Memorial, watched the cherry blossoms flying like a light snowstorm. It's beautiful. You can get a lot out of that, yeah. So Linda says, as an aside, there's a novel written by a character who's from the old Bronx, but goes to jail for 20 years and comes out and returns to the Bronx. Seems like a perfect setup for some changes. Fiction handled with care, it's somebody else's language. But you just want to enter in that world as much as possible. Whether it's your own hometown, whether it's, revolutionary Petersburg, just trying to imagine it. I mean, I lived in that world so much that it was difficult for me to really see where I was in, my body, because I was there all the time. But you need to oxygenate that all the time with more and more and more and more material. So photographs, movies, whatever you can do to keep it alive. Fort Apache, the Bronx. Definitely. It depends on what Bronx you're looking for. Movies, those people have done a lot of research, historical movies, but we're talking about the physical things like, the ice on the hollyhocks. The ice on the pansies. If you can go, it makes a big difference, especially for a novel. You should really try to get that information. But you can also extrapolate elements of summer are summer everywhere. Elements of fall are fall everywhere. But they're also specific to each place. All right. Well, what I thought I would talk about today, if we don't have any more questions about doing this kind of weather study, weather, light, and getting description. Let's talk about description. Let's talk about words. You know, I have been, one of the things that really excites me about fiction is the use of sound and the excitement of really well-chosen word. Often people write for the eye, they don't read their stuff out loud. And there's a whole element of writing that has more to do with the music of the language. You know, there's some writers who are just so dang beautiful on the page, but it's not until you hear it that you realize why, what is making that so beautiful, that you can't believe how gorgeous this is when it's read out loud. And then you realize that there's a poetry in the music. There's a poetry in the language, that somebody has really listens to the sound of language, the cadence of words, how they crunch. I mean, I've talked about this before, and I hope that people can get what I'm saying, is the crunch of good language. Meaning, when if you say the lines, it's not like oatmeal. It's like you can feel the corners of words and the repetitions of certain sounds as they gain power by repetition. So, one S doesn't make any kind of music, but if there's a sentence that uses several S's, the mind will pick that up, the ear will pick that up. And you can tune this in your head. And I try to tune this, keep it tuned by listening to beautiful language, and then reading my stuff out loud, reading beautiful language, usually poetry, for the ear, sound poetry that uses these repetitions, the verbal, the vowel repetitions, the alliteration, the consonant repetitions, and a certain rhythm in the speech. I'm always looking for that in my own work. And if you can imagine that you're going to have to perform this, you're going to perform this book. Like, imagine nobody's going to read it, but they're going to sit there in an audience waiting for you to wow them with the sound of it, because people don't necessarily, the plot of something is the least interesting thing about your book. Least interesting thing. The most interesting thing is the insights and the language. And language can push insight. I was talking about Beowulf the last time. I was just reading Beowulf, and the language is amazing in this, especially this new translation. But the alliteration is so strong that somebody was saying last week that they were told not to use alliteration in prose. And that is, whoever told you that is probably a high school teacher who didn't have much of an ear. Somebody had told them not to do it. It can be, if you're not doing it on purpose, it can kind of be a focus of fun, like easy to parody. But if you're doing it on purpose, it tells the reader that care was taken with this, that there's a music going on here that's giving them more than what, it's giving them more than what was required. Okay, like this. As sand, spit, and surf sang, the beautiful language is being pushed. The language is being pushed by using alliteration, trying to find a word that will alliterate with this as well as saying what you want to say, it pushes the prose up to the next level. Rather than saying, in the breakers, in the breakers, they pushed off and went to see proven guys. I mean, that's kind of what it's saying. But instead, as sand spit and surf sang, they pushed off and sent themselves to see made men. So made men is an anachronism because it means, like the mafia, proven guys. But made men is much more of an interesting formulation than proven guys, right? As sand spit and surf sang is so much more interesting than as the breakers, broke. It's kind of breakers broke. There's another alliteration. See, now I'm thinking. But, it's for the form, the alliteration forces a more interesting formulation. The crunchiness of language, and the compression, because often those loose constructions, and then he went up the elevator and it, got off on the 4th floor and walked past the fish tank. It both has no charm on a language level, but it's so easy to write badly like that. It's just unconscious writing. Like you're trying to just put things here and put things there and walk past them. Whereas to use language, so how would you say got off the elevator and used an alliteration, ejected from the elevator. See, already you're raising the compression and the interest of the sentence. Ejected from the elevator, he, let's use the hallway. So he the hallway. He hustled, hustled, you don't want to say down. He hustled hard by the fish tank on floor 4. This is the top of my head, and this kind of writing is not a top of the head thing, but it's a sound thing. And by working to make the sound happen, you're actually elevating the whole thing. You're elevating the experience. He didn't just go, he hustled, And there's something nice about fish tank. It has corners. Those consonants have corners. You can feel them in your mouth. Imagine reading that section out loud to your audience. Like you're sitting there with audience in the dark. And you're reading your book in a way that you're hoping to keep their imagination. If he went down the hall, past the fish tank on the 4th floor, you can already see your audience going to sleep. It's so boring. The most important thing I love, there's a wonderful documentary about Diana Vreeland, she was a famous editor of Harper's Bazaar, I think, in Vogue. And she would tell her photographers, don't be boring. It's like the worst thing you could do is be boring. And my God, is that true in fiction? If you have a kind of a straightforward scene where, Gertie is confronting Stella about something or other, the scene is of interest. What happens is of interest, but bear down on that language. See if you can make it interesting sentence by sentence. Use one of the things that I'm reading now, a book called The Art and Craft of Dylan Thomas. The Craft and Art of Dylan Thomas, which is a play on the name of the title of a poem of his is In My Craft and Sullen Art. A great poem. And I love Dylan Thomas because he's sound, like he's all about the sound. Like for him, sound is as important as sense. And how he creates his effects. It's noticing the various LS's, like all there's, or SLs, I think maybe, that there's a series of them. He plays with the language, he'll in one poem, almost every line, 72 lines, has an L in it. I mean, that's not something that you're necessarily going to notice, but in playing these kind of games with the language, there is an unconscious element in any kind of art form, especially in language, that even if the reader doesn't figure it out and pick out exactly what it is you're doing, notice that, the number of SKs in that sentence. They'll hear it. And the extra level of interest and artistry in that sentence perks them up. And it's like, oh, this person is actually writing. My old writing teacher, Kate Braverin, used to, if you were submitted your pages, and if you were doing something interesting with the sound, she would put it down. She'd say, that's real writing. Or she'd read something else out loud for you to hear, and say, that's real writing. So writing is not just, how am I going to get, Aunt Mildred push her down those stairs, but how am I going to get the reader's admiration of, oh my God, that's real writing. Somebody just sent me a manuscript, and the first thing I look at is it real writing? Or are they just so interested in their story that they forgot that fiction is made of words? It's made of language. And so there was a question earlier on, Wendy, I believe, had this question. Let's see if I can find it. About, can you fill in as you write? Oh, she's talking about her setting. The setting is changing faster than I can write the book. Well, each scene is going to be in a setting. So it's making that setting real and vivid and closely observed for the 7 pages or whatever that you're in that scene. If anybody want to see what people can do with a room or a single place on the beach, just talking about the light, read Virginia Woolf's The Waves, or don't read the whole thing, just take it out of the library if you don't have it, and just look at the little introduction of each chapter that has description of a place on the beach, or a place in the harbor, or a place in a room, and look what she's doing with the light. It's real writing. That's real writing. And that's what we want, right? We want people to read our book and not just go, oh my God, what happened to Granny? But also, it's like, that's real writing. For me, I'm not going to quit until I get that response from the reader. So it is a layered thing. And you can't do it all at once. But know whether you're doing it or you've done it. Maybe you'll have to do a pass on that scene or that chapter that's just going to be about the language. And are you hitting the language? Maybe you'll do a pass on that scene that's just about the senses. Oh my God, there's no smells in this scene. I've got a scene right now, doctor's office visit. And I've written in big letters at the end, no smells. And I don't want to dry lab it. I'm going to, probably use my dentist's office instead of the doctor's office, but I'm going to get some darn smells that are right. So Brenda says, I just started this novel and the alliteration starts in the first few lines. Didn't notice until now. Author is a poet. It's a Thistle novel, Jenna Rose. Yes, you're going to hear somebody do something with language. It could be cadence, that there's a music to the way it rolls out. And there are certain things that Dylan Thomas does that I can always tell a Dylan Thomas fan when I read their book, is I notice, oh my God, there's the Dylan Thomas cadence. It's like the snail and the sheltered foot, the da and the da da da. He uses that all the time. He likes portmanteau words, where you shove two words together, sort of Joyce. He'll use a quality about an object or a scene, and he'll make an adjective out of it. So the fisherman boat. Okay, there's no such word as fisherman, but it's a boat with a fisherman on it, right? But he compresses it, so it's the fisherman boat. And he does that over and over again. That's a technique he uses a great deal. And I'll see it in somebody else's work and go, Dylan Thomas. I definitely have people listen to, like right now I'm doing giving myself a word bath, word music bath. And I spend a lot of my day listening to poets read their poetry out loud. T.S. Eliot, Dylan Thomas, amazing. Anne Sexton. I have a friend, Donald Raleigh, my teacher, Kate Braverman, anybody who really rolls with it. Listen to Melville out loud, it is, and YouTube is full of this. I've set up a little Dylan Thomas so you can see, this is him reading The Ballad of the Long-Legged Bait, which is one of my very favorite. And listen to the shape of the words. I'm just going to let you listen for like 20 seconds.
The coast, blackened with birds, took a last look at his thrashing hair and whale blue eye. The trodden town rang its cobbles for luck. Then goodbye to the fisherman boat with its anchor free and fast as a bird hooking over the sea, high and dry by the top of the mast.
I mean, try reading that out loud, or listening to it and following along in the book, and then try reading it yourself. All the alliteration, all the assonances, and the way he finds he compresses words, just like the Beowulf, and that's supposed to be an amazing listen along. Sexton, Brodsky, people who read out loud like that. Dedria says the Poetry Foundation has an audio feature. Oh, well, that's good. And so you can hear the poets who play with the sound of language, as opposed to those who are for the eye, like E.E. Cummings. Not quite the same. As fiction writers, like what are we trying to mine from these poets, is what happens when you make the music. And believe me, when you have to perform a scene or chapter in front of an audience, it's just you up there, and you're reading, and you can hear how dull your language is, that there's no crunch to it. It's like oatmeal, like I'm smearing oatmeal over my audience. It's the worst feeling in the world. And so you can prepare for that by making sure everything you're writing is can become a reading piece. So giving yourself a sound bath, maybe for a weekend, instead of watching TV, reading, the latest crime novel or whatever, you just read for sound. You put your headphones on and listen to YouTubes of poets reading their own stuff, and listen for the ones who are really making something interesting happen. Even if you're not a poet, and who is, I'm not a poet, but I can use the techniques of poetry in my prose that make the reader aware that there's more here than just what happened to Donnie, that there's a prize in every sentence. Use a word in a less trammeled way, like Dylan Thomas uses the word grave, and he'll use it where you can't really tell, does he mean engrave, or does he mean, the grave you fall into at the end? It means both. So it's suggestive, it's slightly mysterious, and that's something else to realize, that mystery is something that is lacking in a lot of work. Everything is, people spend too much time worrying about, certain kinds of, like, how am I going to get him from this room to that room, or how am I going to, like, the mechanics of the scene. They worry, like, they'll have spent all their time worrying about the mechanics of the scene, and when they could have spent at least half of that time worrying about their sentences and their choice of words. And it would be, where are you going to put your time that's going, and I do it too, I get obsessed with a name, how I'm going to name something, and instead of spending that time, much better spent looking at the verbs, looking at the adjectives, looking at the sounds, pruning slack stuff back until it really pops. So that is not to say don't write your story. It's just, don't become so hypnotized by the mechanics of your story that you fail to write it. You fail to embody it in the flesh of words. So Dedria says her writing career started with journalism, so it's been a long slog from just the facts. Fiction is an art form. It is an art. And you're an artist. Prose is not poetry. Poetry mostly is about the words, the sound. They don't have a plot to fall back on. So your plot is kind of your fallback position as far as keeping your reader interested. The sound, the language keeps them interested moment after moment. So I just take a couple of days sometime, if you can, this fall, and just give yourself a sound bath of beautiful language. And then before you write, try to read a poem that has tremendous sound that you've heard before, that you know what it's supposed to sound like. And read that before you write. And I guarantee you, instantly it's going to be, your writing will be 30% better, if not 50, 60% better. So anyway, that's my show today, our conversation. So if there's anything that you want me to make, I can design a whole Writing Wednesday around your questions. So if there's anything you want me to address, just send it to me on my website, janetfitchwrites.com. There's a place where you can write to me, and I will design a Writing Wednesday around your question. And we do move from side to side. We do move around. Yes, I saw that. Okay, well, thank you for joining me, and we'll see you next week for Writing Wednesday.